Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, ensuring a better life for Georgians in the 21st century. More than 100 programs of study prepare students for successful careers in the critical professions of education and nursing, as well as business and the liberal arts. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
And by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Coming up on Lawmakers, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle speaks out on the Homestead exemption cut, a proposed sin tax on adult entertainment venues, and we begin our leadership interview series with House Democratic leader Representative DuBose Porter. Those stories and more are coming up next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, Wandy Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening, everyone. Also on tonight's broadcast, House Majority Leader Jerry Keene says the state can no longer subsidize the Homestead Tax Relief Grant. And senior citizens voice concerns about proposed cuts to state services.
And we'll hear from Josephine Bennett of GPB Radio's Macon Bureau on cuts to the school nurse program. But first, our top story tonight, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle says homestead tax exemptions must stay. Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle has thrown his support behind protecting homestead tax relief grants. This is in opposition to Governor Perdue's proposal to repeal these grants in an effort to balance the budget. The Lieutenant Governor took a moment earlier today to explain his plan in detail.
The proposals moving forward is really trying to make sure that the property owner stays whole in the process. And we're going to cap the assessments, so that gives predictability from one year to the next. Property owners will know very clearly that their assessment will be capped, and the only way that local county governments can raise their taxes is by increasing the millage rate. So they'll have to take that vote to do so. The second piece of that is to double the homestead exemption for property owners from $2,000 to $4,000, which will give them also some additional relief on their property owner in case we're not able to continue to fund the homeowners tax relief grant into the future. We have made a strong commitment to the homeowners of this state, and I think it's a commitment we've made that we need to honor, particularly for '09. And in order to do that, that means we're going to have to find $428 million in the state budget. That's going to be difficult on top of the already exorbitant cuts that we've seen in the budget. You're right in that we could be looking at additional furloughs across the state with no exceptions.
House Majority Leader Jerry Keene says that the state can no longer subsidize local governments to offer the Homestead Relief Grant. He says that House Republican leadership will introduce two pieces of legislation tomorrow about property taxes.
For too long now, and we've been talking about this for a number of years, people are opening their property tax bills and the reassessments and seeing 30, 40, and 50% growth on the value of their homes. And yet our local officials say we're not raising your taxes, when in fact we know that this is a backdoor tax increase. It does not in any way limit the ability of local government to raise revenues if they want to raise taxes. They'll simply have to do it the way that we do it, and that is raise the tax rate or the millage rate.
The House will also consider HB 143 tomorrow, a measure to provide property tax grants in supplemental budgets only in years when the state's revenues increase.
And so what we're trying to say is to local governments, the homeowner tax relief grant has not worked in keeping property taxes low. I don't think anyone can make a factual argument that that program has kept property taxes and the growth of property taxes low. In fact, the exact opposite has happened. My hope would be that the state's going to eventually get out of the property tax business. We're only in it to $250,000 now. Certainly now is not the time to repeal that in total, but I think it's something we're going to look at maybe as soon as the next session.
And in other legislative news, state legislators want to reduce the incidence of sexual exploitation of minors in Georgia. Lawmakers Minoo Hosseini joins us live from the Capitol with that story. Minoo.
Members of the Joint House and Senate Commission on Sexual Exploitation of Minors announced their legislative agenda today. It included what could be referred to as a sin tax, a $3 to $5 fee assessed on every visitor to an adult entertainment club. Senator Renee Unterman outlined the commission's plans.
As a result of the commission's findings, a legislative package is presented. 3 bills related to sexual exploitation will be entered this session. Senator Murphy's bill about entrance into entertainment business was preliminarily released. The second bill is the expanding the definition of sexual exploitation so that any person, right now in the code section, a parent or a caregiver has to report sexual exploitation. This expands the definition so that any person would have to report it. And the third bill in the package is to increase the age. Currently, if you're an erotic dancer, now in the state of Georgia, you can be 18 years old and dance. This would increase the age statewide to 21 years old.
When asked about where the revenue raised from the adult entertainment club fee would go, Senator Unterman clarified that it would not go towards the state's budget deficit. Rather, it would go towards building facilities to help rehabilitate the victims.
It's really not new revenue, and it's certainly dedicated revenue so that it's not going into the general fund and being appropriated to other things. It will specifically go into DHR to be used for these girls.
The committee aims to use these 3 bills in conjunction with the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which Unterman hopes the state will be able to apply for and receive federal dollars from. Reporting live, I'm Minoo Hosseini for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks for that report, Minoo. Well, Senator John Bullock introduced legislation today in response to the recent salmonella outbreak at a Blakely, Georgia-based peanut company. He says this bill will create more safety when it comes to these type of problems and help reestablish confidence in Georgia's peanut industry.
It's unfortunate that the protocol that this company had, that when a test came out and showed the presence of salmonella, they retested. If it did not show it, then they continued to ship that product. I've got a piece of legislation that I hope to be able to drop in the morning, but we don't want to be in haste and create something that affects the manufacturing industry of food products, because one size doesn't fit all. A lot of it's going to have to be done by rules and regs. But this legislation will require that a food processing facility, if they have a test, either from their labs or a private lab, that comes back positive to some poisonous element, that they would have to notify the Department of Agriculture.
And Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle says he stands by Senator Bullock's legislation and took a moment after the Senate adjourned today to comment on possible investigations when it comes down to who is responsible.
And we're going to get to the bottom of it. This is a serious matter, one that not only impacts Georgia, but the peanut industry as a whole. And we cannot relax. We can't wait. We have to get to the bottom of it, and the integrity of the industry is at stake here.
Governor Sonny Perdue is backing legislation that would add hundreds of dollars to the cost of a speeding ticket. Lawmakers Valarie Edwards is live at the Capitol with more on the super speeder legislation.
In Wandy, with Governor Perdue's backing, House Bill 160 could become law within a matter of weeks. The measure takes aim at the super speeder, folks who habitually drive in excess of 85 miles an hour. Based on an average collection rate of 60% from neighboring states with similar legislation, super speeder fines could generate more than $20 million annually. All of that money going to help bridge the gap in trauma care funding. The bill was introduced to the General Assembly earlier this week by Representative Jim Cole of Monroe County.
And it's been well known for a long time that there's a lingo on the truckers network that it's called the Georgia overdrive, that once they hit the state line in Georgia, they're able to make up time. And the surrounding states, real hard on speed violations. So we've become viewed in the South as a is a lax state in that area. So the governor wants to try to create a behavior of slowing people down.
You'll recall Governor Perdue mentioned superspeeder legislation in his most recent State of the State address when he talked about finding a permanent funding source for trauma care.
So my budget will reflect, in conjunction with our superspeeder legislation, provide $60 million to sustain and expand the state's trauma network.
Now let's take a look by the numbers at what speedy drivers are already costing the citizens of Georgia. According to the latest figures from the DOT, there were 1,600 traffic deaths in 2007 at a cost of $1.8 billion. And sooner rather than later, drive the state's highways at more than 85 miles an hour or more than 75 miles an hour on a 2-lane road, and on top of whatever the local authorities charge, it'll cost you an additional $200. House Bill 1 is directly tied to the governor's budget to fund trauma care. The anticipated $20 million from superspeeder legislation is intended to help fill that gap. But right now, the state's trauma care network is looking at a shortfall of nearly $60 million. Reporting live, I'm Valarie Edwards for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks, Valerie. Well, the Senate unanimously passed the Zero-Based Budgeting Act today. SB 1 sponsor Senator David Schaefer says this is a measure that requires all current and new spending in the governor's budget be reported in segments over a 4-year period.
I've introduced this bill 3 times before, and this body has approved it 3 times before, the last 2 times unanimously. Right now, Georgia operates under a continuation budget. The budget that we adopt each year details only about 3 or 4% of the proposed spending, those programs which are new. And once those new programs are approved, they are automatically and perpetually rolled over into each succeeding budget under a single line item called continuation. This bill will put Georgia on a zero-based budgeting system. It will require the administration to submit to this body all proposed spending, not just the new spending, for at least 1/4 of the agencies in each budget year, so that over a 4-year period of time, over the term of a governor, the General Assembly will scrutinize every dollar that's spent.
Now, if signed by the governor, this Zero-Based Budgeting Act goes into effect beginning 2011. Senate Bill 1 now goes over to the House.
The House also passed its first bill today, although House Bill 117 was an organizational bill renaming several committees. House Speaker Glenn Richardson took time to review the House rules on voting.
All of you new members, this will be your first actual vote on a piece of legislation. You might want to find your way to the floor. You need to have your cards. I'm going to remind everybody, since this is the first actual vote, your card, access card, your voting card is yours. And I do not wish to see, and it's against House rules, for you to vote someone else's machine, except when specifically authorized by the chair when somebody's on the podium. So I'm going to be paying attention to that, or I'm going to try to. Do not vote someone else's machine. Clerk will unlock the machine. Anybody else need to vote? If all members now voted, so the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of House Bill 117, the yeas are 148, the nays are 0.
And passage of House Bill 117 clarifies names and rules for several House and Senate committees, including the Agricultural, Judiciary, and Economic Development committees. Senior rights groups gathered at the Capitol today to protest budget cut proposals to senior services. Lawmakers Brittany Evans is live at the Capitol with that story. Brittany.
Thanks, Nwandi. All over the Capitol today, you could see bright green stickers with the words "Be There for Seniors" on lobbyists, visitors, and legislators alike. I was able to speak to many of those advocates as they rallied on the Capitol steps. Senior rights groups are facing budget cuts that would take away millions of dollars from food and care programs. They battled winter temperatures to make their opinions clear this morning.
If you cut the service, people my age, and a lot of them who are taking care of people that are younger than they are, will no longer be able to take care of their loved ones.
For many at the Capitol today, like Richard Garcia, who is in the early stages of dementia, it was a very personal issue.
I myself have nearly set my house on fire trying to cook. That may sound humorous to some people, but when you forget, when you forget what burner you turn on, or you forget the burner is still on and you lay something on the burner, that's devastating. If it were not for the services like Cambridge House, I and others like myself would have nowhere to go.
Several legislators came to the rally in support. Senator Nan Orrick also spoke in the well today, calling for a rollback of the cuts that she described as incredibly severe. Reporting live, I'm Brittany Evans for Lawmakers.
Okay, thank you, Brittany. Well, we invite you to check out GPB's online resources at gpb.org/lawmakers. Find the latest from GPB's radio news team and watch Lawmakers online. All that and more at gpb.org/lawmakers. We invite you to visit that site and vote in our legislative issue poll.
Lawmakers begins our series of leadership interviews tonight with the House Democratic leader, Representative DuBose Porter. I had the opportunity to sit down with Representative Porter earlier today, and I began by asking him about property taxes.
Counties rely on it, homeowners rely on it. This year's budget had it in it. That's why we called for a special session earlier in the year, so that we could help soften the impact of these cuts. The governor did not acknowledge that, and we're here with a shorter period of time to fill that hole. But what we wanted to look at is, let's don't do across-the-board cuts, especially in the environment we're in now. You've got to prioritize things in the budget. I mean, there are areas we could have deferred. I mean, we started fishing lakes, ponds down in Perry this year, but by across-the-board cuts, we kicked veterans out of the War Veterans Home in Milledgeville. So it's a matter of choices. Now, what we could have done is a number of things in the budget. You had a reserve that's over $1 billion. We know now with the stimulus package things that will help offset much of that, especially in Medicaid. That will give enough cushion to rearrange things in the budget to provide the funds for that.
The governor's been pretty adamant that the state budget is not looking towards Washington for any funding, but I'm wondering what role you think that the federal government may have in kind of helping Georgia to alleviate its financial problems.
Well, it will be a great partner in that, especially in these projects. You know, what the new president wants are things that are shovel ready, things that could be bid out and ready. And listen, we have a backlog of those. The city of Atlanta, our smaller towns, our counties, we have projects that are ready to go. Water and sewer projects, rail projects. There are things that will put people to work quickly, and we need to be reaching out. We can't let, you know, there was a joke being said about Georgia and Texas as being orphan states because we're not making the overtures. What we're trying to do as Democrats, since the Democrats have a majority, we have a Democratic president, bridge that gap. We have offered to help be the conduit to help with things. We have members of our caucus who have a national presence with that, and we've offered to try to close that gap. But we can't hold back and say we're not going to take advantage of that. It's our money. We need the projects here. Let's make Georgia part of the partnership that shares in coming out of this economic depression or recession, whatever you want to call it.
Whatever we want to call it.
Well, it's slowed down, and people are worried about their jobs. And how do you get people back to work? How do they know that they can their jobs will be secure and that the credit will now be available? It's not just about the former plan of giving something to Wall Street. We need to get it down where people can get back to work. And this stimulus package has things that will do that. And we need to reach out. In the same way that we made the gesture at the beginning of the session, we need to do that from this state to Washington too, and do this together.
Well, Representative Porter, we certainly appreciate you coming in and updating us on Lawmakers.
Sure.
When Governor Perdue released his amended 2009 budget, he eliminated $30 million to fund school nurses. That proposal has come under fire from parents, nurses, and a few lawmakers. Josephine Bennett from GPB member station WMUM in Macon recently spent time with one school nurse in Bibb County. I began our discussion by asking Josephine what she found out during this visit.
I spent a couple of hours with Nurse Carol Foster. She works at the Butler Pre-K Center in Macon. It's part of the public school system, and its classrooms include regular and special education students. And many of the kids she sees are what you might call medically fragile. She deals with everything from typical scraped knees all the way to children who have to be tube fed. In fact, while I was there, a teacher brought in a 4-year-old to have his temperature taken, so it really runs the gamut.
Josephine, tell us how Bibb County pays for its school nurses, and is this typical of how others pay for it?
Well, first of all, to tell you a little bit about Bibb County, the system has 43 schools and close to 25,000 students. There are 15 nurses who cover the district. 5 of those are paid for by the school system, and the other 10 are paid for by state funding. It's different in each of the 186 school districts in Georgia. Some receive more state funding and some receive less. And, you know, at a time when school districts are already hurting, these cuts are sure to mean less school nurses.
And a lot of those nurses showed up in Atlanta at the Capitol this week. What was their primary reason for being there?
Well, Joanne Guile with the Georgia Association of School Nurses says they were there to meet with the Governor's Department of Education policy advisors to discuss their concerns. They say they know times are tough, but they're hoping that lawmakers will find the money to put back in the budget before they actually vote on the budget. And they were there, of course, to talk to lawmakers and raise awareness.
Well, Josephine, what are the nurses hoping is going to happen at the end of all of this?
Well, what they're hoping will happen is that lawmakers are going to find a way to put it back in the budget. You know, when I visited Foster, she brought up a really interesting point as well. She says with more people finding themselves out of work, they're losing their health coverage, and often the school nurse is the only medical professional that these children have access to.
Well, that's some good information. Thank you very much, Josephine Bennett from WMUM in Macon. Thank you.
Thank you.
The revitalization of Jekyll Island has raised new concerns for Senator Jeff Chapman of Brunswick, who has been closely involved with the progress of this project. While the Jekyll Island Authority is focused on increasing visitation, Senator Chapman says this renovation could cost taxpayers approximately $100 million. Lawmakers Tiana Fernandez has more.
The Jekyll Island Authority's current contract with their private partner, Linger Longer Communities, has the authority receiving only 1% of the project's profit. According to Senator Chapman, Linger Longer Communities is in the process of building a timeshare complex expected to gross sales around $163 million, with the authority receiving a profit of about $1.6 million.
What we're striving for is a good, fair, balanced deal. A public-private partnership should be good for both parties. And at the same time, under this economic situation we have, we're really concerned that we're taking on this huge amount of debt when we don't have to.
The debt that Senator Chapman is referring to is the proposal of an additional $50 million bond for the Jekyll Island Authority to renovate the convention center and improve the island's parks. Repaying these bonds would cost taxpayers approximately $100 million.
If we adhere to the Code of Ethics of Government Service, we are to find and employ more efficient, economical ways of getting tasks accomplished.
Senator Chapman is working on a proposal that would negotiate a better deal for the authority while serving the best interests of the people.
What folks would like to see is Jekyll rebuilt responsibly and at the same time be fiscally or financially strong. We can accomplish that.
Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Tiana Fernandez.
The Senate Commission on Regulated Industries and Utilities heard testimony on the proposed Georgia Nuclear Energy Financing Act, or SB 31, late yesterday afternoon. Now, if passed, this bill would allow utility companies to charge customers to cover the cost of building nuclear power plants before the plants are built. Today in the hearing, bill sponsor Senator Don Balfour presented the benefits of the bill.
We are today and didn't pass this bill, in 5 or 6 years, the citizens of Georgia would pay for that plant based on $6.4 billion. The increase in the rates to the customers would be substantial in those 2 years. If we pay for it in this bill, if passed, the interest portion would be paid as we go along. That does 2 things for you. First of all, we save about $300 million in interest. Interest on interest. That interest on interest is gone. If we don't pass this, that interest on interest goes in the cost of the construction, and the consumers will pay for it.
Now, critics of SB 31 say that the costs have not been accurately calculated. Will Phillips of AARP explains.
Suggestions that Senate Bill 31 may allow customers to pay less over the 60-year life of a nuclear power plant are cold comfort to the families struggling to make ends meet today, or to the small business owners who are trying to make really just to turn a profit.
The opposition also says that the bill would tie the hands of the Public Service Commission, which usually makes utility rate decisions. They also worry that the public cannot handle a rate hike during the current economic climate.
Senator Kasim Reed and members of the Atlanta delegation want voters to decide whether to bolster the city's police and fire departments with increased property taxes. Reed says city government has been slow to respond to growing concern about public safety, so a referendum is in order.
What we wanted to do was to figure out how to get out of the politics. So we don't have anything negative to say about people's decision on council to vote against the revenue increase. But what we believe is that if given the opportunity to pay for additional police and fire people on the street, we think the citizens ought to have the right to make that choice.
The Reed plan would increase Atlanta property taxes by $1 million and allocate the money to public safety. Senator Reed said this would cost the owner of a $250,000 home about $6 per month, a cost some communities are already paying, according to Senator Nan Orrock.
There have been privately funded safety patrols established, and people are paying into those funds, and that's right, $30 a month in many cases. One was just created in my neighborhood of Ormwood Park, which is adjacent to Grant Park, where the murder happened at the Standard Food establishment recently. The neighbors are showing around Atlanta with their own dollars that they are willing to buy in to public safety.
It's our hope, candidly, that the mayor and council, because they can act faster than we can. So we would love it as senators and as representatives if the mayor and council said, you know what, we don't need the help of the Senate. We don't need the help of the House. We'll go ahead and assess a millage increase that's dedicated solely to police and fire.
Now, we did attempt to contact the City of Atlanta for a comment on this proposal, but our calls and emails were not returned by broadcast time.
Coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, nonprofit groups speak out about the impact of proposed budget cuts and Senator Preston Smith's legislation that would overhaul the state's indigent defense system. We'll have those stories and more tomorrow on Lawmakers at 7 p.m. If you have missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. on GPB or at 7 a.m. on GPB Knowledge. You can also keep up with all the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Well, coming up on GPB television, This Old House, that's next here on GPB.
Before we close, we'd like to take a moment to send out get well wishes to a loyal Lawmakers viewer. Representative Brooks Coleman is recuperating at home from open heart surgery. We understand he's anxious to return to the Gold Dome, and we wish him a speedy recovery. That's going to be our broadcast for this, the 9th legislative day of the 2009 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Wandy Lawson.
And I'm David Zelski. Join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. for Lawmakers. Good night.
Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.